The 69th Congress has brought here Mr. Zuckerberg to testify about this weird cryptocurrency and to answer all of our questions, no matter how stupid they are. Now, Mr. Zuckerberg, do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes. I'm not a lizard, by the way. Welcome to the Unstoppable Force podcast. I'm Guy,
And I'm Rob.
and today we're going to be talking about Libra, blockchain, and
Other cryptocurrencies.
yeah.
And the progress that Libra is aiming to make.
And honestly, like the technology of what a blockchain is and how it's not, the applications of it don't just end at currencies. Yeah. Um,
So I guess we can get right into just like what a blockchain is.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who listen may not really understand what it is. I think the term gets thrown around a lot, and you hear it especially if you're in like the crypto space, and you hang out with people who are more into that sort of thing. But it's essentially it's essentially like a database, more or less,
Yeah.
of information. And there's a reason why it's so widely used, and it's actually because of its security and the fact that all the information is available to everybody. That doesn't really explain how it works.
No.
I mean, how would you say?
So basically, the goal of it is to decentralize information, and the currency is like decentralized with crypto. But basically, when there's a transaction between two people,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just those two people recording in, everybody has to just assume that that's correct. Everybody has their own ledger that everybody sees this transaction happening, and they all record it. So there's a decentralized agreement that these transactions happen, so they can't be duplicated or faked
Right.
or anything.
And the reason why it's actually so secure is because like every time there is a transaction that occurs, essentially it's like a little block of information.
Yeah.
And each block has what's called a hash. And the block before it will have a hash that will send it to the next block in the chain. And then that block will have a hash that will send it to the next block in the chain. So the problem is that if you wanted to essentially change the information, you would have to change the information of one block, but that would also change the hash.
Right.
So then it would render the following parts of the chain useless. So then you would actually have to change the hash of every block following the one that you originally changed, and then it would work. But because it's a peer-to-peer and it's basically a database that everyone has a copy of, anytime anyone messes with one, then it will be checked against all of the rest of them, and if it's not, then it gets basically ignored.
Right.
It gets like, okay, this is an invalid piece of like
Yeah.
block or chain of a block.
The nodes, the different
Yeah,
like
individual
places. Yeah.
little blocks of information. Um, so in order to actually change information in a blockchain, you would have to change the information of one block. And then there's also something called proof of work, which is basically in order to change the information in a block, you basically have to like, as far as I understood when I was doing my research, you have to almost like wait 10 minutes. Or like there's an idea of like
Yeah.
a waiting period to prove the work that you did.
Yeah,
So
it's like yeah, because it's like checked in a sense.
yeah. So like if you were to like manipulate anything in the chain, you couldn't do it all at once, like and do every single block. So you would have to first off be able to change the information. Then you have to prove your work, and then you have to do it for every single block, and then you have to somehow make it so every or at least more than 50% of the people on the network have been basically manipulated.
Yeah.
And if there's like a million people on the network, there's no chance.
Right.
So it's like an ultra secure, 100% available, visible database
Yeah.
of
Exactly.
information.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that no one person is in control, or no like
Right.
few people are in control.
It's through the majority that it remains like
Valid.
Yeah, valid.
Absolutely.
And the really fascinating part about this is that even though we're using it to just like send money, wow, I really stumbled over my words there. Even though we're using it right now to send money to other people and have these transactions, that is definitely not the only thing that blockchain is being used
Yeah,
for.
I know. Like in the business world, there's been talk of using structuring business
Hmm.
and like workplaces even.
There's like some cool applications like that, but one of the really cool ones I found was like names too. Like you could have birth certificates
Yeah.
because that means that everybody in the world would have access to it and it would be all in one like place and no
Right.
one can change the information of your birth certificate, so you would like be able to know that.
Yeah. So you can validate it with your your address basically,
Hmm.
and you can do that. Basically, could in a sense like replace like social security
Yeah,
like numbers and where like that's your identification. But if you can just use this blockchain, everybody knows that's you.
I think
It,
there's a company that's already doing it. I think it's like block name or something like that. And then there was another one that was really cool. There's actually a lot of different of these like small startups that are trying to use blockchain technology to revolutionize forms of information that would have to be standardized and then also like available and very transparent information that would have to be like kept and can't be old. So like deeds of owning houses can be used.
yeah.
So now every person who's ever owned a house, every time that house changes hands, that's an information within that blockchain.
Yeah.
So it's essentially these databases that are impenetrable, information databases that are impenetrable based off of the way that they've been designed using the peer-to-peer network and
Yeah.
the chain of blocks and
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. It's really cool because you can take this, like, there's talk of using the cryptocurrency to replace, like, what's called fiat and, like, US dollar and
Mhm.
other stuff because that's kind of controlled by government. But then now you do that with, like, land or houses or that's deeds. And
The
then,
internet too,
yeah.
like domain names.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure isn't there like a company in America that standardizes and like
Oh, yeah.
controls the domains? It's like FICA.
Yeah. I don't know what it's
I
called.
think
But,
it might actually be FICA.
right. So if you could decentralize that, then, like,
Nobody but the internet
yeah.
controls the internet,
Right.
which is awesome. It's like technological anarchy that works
Yeah.
and is way more secure because we're all part of it.
Right, and you won't be like removing or silencing dissenting voices that like the government doesn't like,
Hmm.
or like if you took China when they say whatever didn't happen, and now like everybody can like prove that it happened because the government
Hmm.
can't control that because everybody's validating
Yeah,
this.
imagine like where the government's like budget and where all their money goes and everything was available at like publicly. That would be amazing because then we would know where all of our money is like actually going to, and we would realize how corrupt certain like spending is. But I don't think the government's gonna
I
use
wouldn't.
its own blockchain to do
Yeah,
things,
I don't
but
think they would adopt it
I actually think it's gonna be more
in the fit.
that
I think it's in spite of the government, kind of
yeah.
like it's gonna use it to get around it.
Yeah,
These
we're essentially just
regulations.
going to create our own currency and then the dollar is going to just like disappear
Yeah,
because
because
who
right now,
cares?
with crypto, all these values of these cryptocurrencies are based on the dollar because that's what you know the value of a dollar. You know
Hmm.
that, so you're like, oh, this, Bitcoin is whatever $11,000. It's like, oh, you're still referencing that. If we have to get away from referencing what the dollar value is in these cryptos and just reference them on their own.
Right. I mean, I think that's going to come in time when we have like more currency almost emulating forms of cryptocurrencies. And I think that's kind of like what Facebook's trying to do with Libra.
Yeah.
I don't want to jump into Libra yet, but just on the idea of like a currency and like what Bitcoin sort of is more similar to, because Bitcoin doesn't feel like a currency; it feels more like a commodity, where it's like kind of like gold or like precious
Mm.
metals or oil,
Yeah.
where depending on how available it is, would adjust its price somewhat.
Right.
Either you're mining it.
Exactly, because there's a finite amount of Bitcoin,
Hmm.
and as there's more are mined, it becomes harder and longer.
Hmm.
Takes longer to mine these Bitcoin, and obviously, like the value kind of changes with like if there's a new one, then the value kind of changes. Versus like if you could just create like money, right? You could just
Right.
print it, and then you have your inflation and all this other stuff. So yeah, it's more like actually mining gold. If you're mining Bitcoin, there's a finite amount of it. It's harder to get it
Hmm.
if you've already mined a bunch of it, because you can't find that much gold left if you already have a bunch of it. So yeah, it's very much like gold.
Yeah. And I think that's the reason why we're not seeing it be adopted as much as like a currency or seen as a currency, because it's not being treated like one.
Yeah,
Because currencies, they're supposed to be very stable. You're
yeah,
supposed to, like, if I get a dollar, it's not like tomorrow suddenly the dollar is going to be worth half as much as like a, I don't know, like a
was before.
euro,
Yeah,
versus like right now where I think it's only slightly less than a euro. It's not going to double in price. It's not going to like rapidly change over a year. It's going to stay like roughly a very like a small adjustments up or down, but pretty much the same thing. And I think that's like what Libra's trying to
right.
do.
So what I've said before, because I've been in like the crypto sphere kind of, and with Bitcoin I think it has a problem. It's like a paradox where I think the reason it hasn't been adopted as a currency because it's so volatile. The
Right.
value is volatile. But I think that in order for it to not become volatile, it has to be accepted as a currency, because we're just basing it off of like, oh, we're just perceiving it as like, kind of investments, and then basing it off of the dollar in a sense. But if we just said, you can use that at Amazon or whatever, like, like a fraction of a Bitcoin is what it costs to buy a pair of shoes, you're gonna base that, and then everything else is based off of that, what that coin is worth. So now you have
Hmm.
a fraction associated with certain products. Then it will like stabilize because people will have more confidence in the buying power of Bitcoin.
Well, I believe like part of it too is that it doesn't essentially work like a currency does, where a currency is controlled by usually a government.
Well, it what like
And
a while no like it like maybe as we know it now, but before when we had gold, it's not just controlled by the government, because
well,
gold was
right,
all used as a currency, and that's what you used to trade with. And you used
it was
fractions
still
of
sort
gold.
of a
Now,
commodity even back then though, because if you go to, let's say, like you're a trader from Europe and you go to the Middle East and you buy gold and then you come back to Europe and then you resell it, it's going to sell for a lot more in Europe than it did in the Middle East because it's more abundant in the Middle East, right? So like even if my geography is incorrect, no matter what, the idea of going to one place to get something and then bringing it back to another place where it's more valuable is what trading is. And at least throughout history, it was moving goods to from a location of cheapness to a location of expensiveness. And that was why they were able to make money. And so like I think gold became a currency in the places that they brought it to, but it still fluctuated in value greatly. And I don't know how they might have standardized things.
well,
They
like
may
we
have forced
standardized the dollar.
standardization.
We were on the gold standard, which is like we perceived the dollar based on gold. So like we moved off of that, at some point.
Yeah.
Then we just perceived the dollar. We don't need to know how much gold. Like now we ask how much is an ounce of gold in dollars. Like it's reversed now. But
Right.
at some point we used the gold as the standard, and that was used as a currency.
Hmm.
That was it.
But the price of gold was still controlled by somebody then, right? Because it can't fluctuate greatly and be a currency. But I
It
guess
doesn't have
because
to
it
be
was seen
controlled.
as a
It's
currency, maybe there was like a greater,
yes,
like you said, there's a greater social obligation to
yeah,
try
like
to,
like a perception. It's
yeah,
just like a social perception. That's all it is. It's like a
exactly. Um, and I think we do actually have to like obviously establish that social perception, but just like with everything else, there has to be something that pushes us towards that social
absolutely.
perception.
Well, I just want to make one like more point about Bitcoin and other
Hmm.
like other coins, cryptos. Like people have like accepted Bitcoin as a currency. I don't know what state. I haven't looked. I haven't like found it, looked it up recently, but I know a state has accepted Bitcoin for taxes. They have done that. So it can be accepted, and like it could be more widely uh, widespread acceptance. But yeah, it totally makes sense that if it's so volatile, you don't want like to sell a cup of coffee and like then it shoots up in value. Now you spent like $100 on your cup of
Yeah,
coffee. Like it totally makes sense, it's like that's why I think there's the paradox there, and I think that's why Libra is trying to introduce like a, in my opinion, like a pseudo decentralized coin
yeah.
so that it will be more stable. And
Well, I think like one of the important things, and this is what I was kind of meaning more when I was like saying how currencies, they're controlled by governments. Even though they're controlled by governments, there's always an exchange rate between different
governments,
currencies,
yeah, but that's between
right?
different places, like
Right, but
you
that's
know
what Libra's sort of trying to do in the fact that every time that you exchange money for Libra, you also they're taking out like a security with the government to back that bit or that Libra coin or whatever, and just I guess it's just called
Libra,
Libra.
yeah.
Um so they're trying to back their coins with real world money and assets,
Hmm.
which makes it more stable. And they're trying to also market it as a currency, whereas Bitcoin did not try to market itself as a currency. It just marketed itself as a something that you can have a certain amount of, and was just like, you guys decide what it's worth. And if
Hmm.
humans just decided what it's worth and we were all able to mine it, the mindset and the way it was presented was sort of like gold. So it's going to be perceived and acted upon like gold, whereas Libra is going out with the intention of it and is even setting up exchange rates essentially for getting Libra. And if there's exchange rate, there's a value. And I think that's the big difference is that it's like saying like, hey, we just made this new currency and you can hand us money and we'll give you Libra that's equivalent to that money, but it's not
Like
it's
that's what you do with Bitcoin. It's like
right, but it's not the same. I feel like
so it's
you're not
like
giving it to Facebook when you're buying Bitcoin. You're giving it to
uh,
some person
you're
who's
no
got
you're
Bitcoin,
okay, right. So that's what kind of makes it different. That's why it's
and
pseudo
it's mined,
decentralized.
so it's not given out by a centralized, like some sort of
You're
centralized
right,
group, which
right,
Facebook would be in this
right,
case.
right.
Because I think that you need that central, like some sort of
Centralization.
central, like some sort of governing body to determine whether or not this thing is going to like it's essentially like if I could just mine the crap out of Bitcoin, right? Let's say every government in the entire world spent $10 billion to mine Bitcoin. They can do it really fast, right?
They can try, yeah,
And then obviously the more they mine, the harder it gets.
yeah.
But with Facebook, you're not able to just make an infinite number of or like a pseudo it's finite, right? But it's you can continue
But
to make
no,
it and it
like
just
the
gets
idea
harder
is
and
that like
harder.
it's like a very long time between coins have been mined at this time because so many have been.
I guess it's kind
So
of like if the government is printing money and they're controlling how much
so
new money is
right.
entering the
So
the
how can you say that?
system.
How's any? I don't. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I don't really know how securities work or whatever. But
Right.
if if Libra's like tied to these securities and other things that are tied to the government, why can't the government just fuck around and then now they've essentially fuck around what Libra's worth at that point? See,
I
like you're
don't know
putting
if
in the
they can
hands
fuck
in
around
that.
with what Libra is worth though, because it's just I like I said I or like you said I don't know how the securities work and how they're essentially backing up Libra with real world money. But I mean, money is money, and it doesn't matter what country you're in. And if crypto is the next currency form, I don't think that it would make sense to not base it off of real world money. And the more based on real world money it is, the more
Well,
stable it
okay,
is.
so there's base,
And
but
that's
then
why
there's like,
Bitcoin isn't based on real world
well,
money. It's just based off of what people think it's worth.
okay, yeah, I guess. It's just it's backed by real world money. It's not even that just it's based off of it. It's backed by it, meaning that it's directly tied to it when you trade for like a Libra. If you want to go get one, like so basically the way it's set up is like the Libra Association, um, and that whenever somebody buys a Libra, the association buys bank deposit or short term government security and it's held. It's the Libra reserve. So then you create, and then Libra is created based on. So basically, when you're buying it's based off of it's based off these things, so that's changed outside of like with the government change, like the deposits and the securities, that's changed with the government. But with the dollar, because the dollar is a value that's perceived, and it's changed with inflation.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin is independent of changing alongside the dollar. Like the dollar can change and go up and down. Bitcoin is going to change however it wants to. That's why the stock market changes differently than Bitcoin does.
Yeah.
But with like securities and stuff, when it's directly backed by these, securities and dollars.
So you're saying like if the U.S. dollar gets hit, so would Libra,
That's
basically. You're saying
yeah.
because they're not just like you're not just exchanging a dollar bill for a Libra. You're basically getting a Libra, but it's not actually Libra. It's really just a dollar
Mm,
behind a wall that says it's Libra
yeah,
now.
yeah,
That's what you're kind of saying more. And
yeah.
I think that that's honestly sort of true in this case. Like I think that in order to even make it be stable, because humans, I don't know, we just have a natural
Right.
inclination not to want to stabilize it, I guess. That's the only way that Facebook could come up with as to a way to make it so that it's not this like ridiculously
Right.
fluctuating system.
Yeah. So like I'm not. I think that this Libra coming out is it's good. It'll get like the crypto mainstream, where the people that were afraid of using any crypto because they're so
Hmm.
volatile, they'll get them, and that's good. And usually when you get into crypto, then you start looking, you're like, okay, well, I'll probably get into these other ones, because you start to understand what it's really about. And then if you're really trying to see the difference between backed by securities and just not backed by anything and just being there, you're gonna realize that we're still kind of tied down. It's not the freedom that we're getting, because what happens
Yeah.
when at
It's
some
not
point,
fully
if it's like
decentralized, essentially.
if it's fully adopted, everybody's using this Libra now, and it's backed by these securities. How do you get off of these securities? Does the reserve just sell that shit back, and then like to the government, and then what happens? It has the money, and then it puts it into
Well, maybe it's
Libra.
like maybe so can you sell your Libra back to Facebook, right? Is
Yeah.
that something we'd be able to do?
Uh. Yeah, and that's when so there's the coins are minted. So the way they're created, when authorized resellers purchase coins from the association, fiat assets to fully back new coins.
Yeah.
And then when the coins are destroyed or burned, when authorized resellers sell the Libra coins to the association in exchange for the underlying assets. So I think that's like more exchanges and resellers versus like you or me. I think you and I would have like a Coinbase, which is like a crypto exchange,
Yeah.
where you would have that, and you would buy crypto, you'd buy Libra from them, and they would provide it you with that. They'd be holding a bunch of Libra, and they'd send you a Libra
So they
for
buy the
dollars.
Libra from Facebook and then
Yeah, and they're
sell it to us.
resellers. Yeah, so there's resellers. So there's reserve. Then there's the resellers. So we, like, normal people would buy this stuff from the resellers, and the resellers could buy or sell back to the reserve.
Okay.
So
So
we have to get
maybe
to a point where the resellers don't want to sell back, and we're all on this crypto, basically.
yeah,
That,
I think it's more of like a safety net maybe if you look at it that way, like
mm,
it can't
it's like
crash.
it's like a last resort, I think,
So
type of
like
deal.
because it's based on real money, it can never be worth less than what you bought it for essentially. Because if it is, then it would be if you buy it, you're losing money essentially,
Right.
or like you're going like it should still be like a stable exchange rate.
Yeah.
So maybe that's kind of what they're going for is like that baseline, like, hey, you can buy this and know that it's not going to lose you money,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah.
Um, but if everyone stopped kind of well, I was gonna say like maybe when these resellers buy the Libra coin, so first off there's zero, and then every time they buy one, it gets backed. But once there's enough in the
Circulation.
circulation, they'll stop buying more and they'll just start exchanging what they have. So
Mm.
like if Coinbase has 1,000 Libra and 10 people buy 100, and then one person sells 50. Now if somebody else buys 50, they can give it to that. So it's kind of like using what people sell and buy to kind of just filter it through. So like they'll always have, maybe they'll buy like 1,500 instead, and if 10 people buy 100, they have 500. So if anybody buys more, they can give it out, and if anybody sells, they can take it and put it back into the pool to then be sold again. So I guess if
Right.
there's enough in circulation, then they wouldn't be taking out any more from Facebook, and then
Right.
that might kind of stabilize it even more.
Right. That's what it has to be like widespread when they don't need to buy
Mhm.
anymore. But there, I wonder if like securities are finite or like whatever they're backing with is finite because if they run out of buying the Libra, then like what happens then now like, they don't really have it to sell and they can't buy more like bonds or whatever
Do you mean
bank
like if Libra
deposits.
has a finite amount,
Yeah, because
essentially?
there's a finite amount of bank deposits and a finite, but I guess there's enough amount of people that are gonna keep doing that until they're all bought up.
I feel like Facebook is going to adjust how it handles everything as it goes, because this is such new ground that even Facebook is going in blind.
Yeah, yeah, and they're doing it in like such a different like approach. Like they're even what they're doing is gonna be changed in 5 years. So they're
Yeah.
gonna and they're announced Libra, and then it's supposed to start up in like beginning mid like of like the middle of the beginning of next year, and it's gonna start with the Libra Association, which is so like other like the blockchain when everybody has like a ledger that you can record the data that's moving around in
Yeah.
the transactions. This initially right now they have 28 members of the association, and they're called founders, and they're trying to get 100 founders by the time the coin like is launched, and these founders are like different companies like telecommunication, blockchain companies like credit card companies, Mastercard, PayPal, like even Uber and Lyft, and all these companies are going to be like the founders that are going to be basically at the table determining that the transactions are legitimate instead of every single person that's trading Libra. Up
Hmm.
until they want to get um like for the like 5 years they want to fully decentralize, I think something along those lines, where
It
well
is
in
peer to
5 years
peer?
they're going to start decentralizing fully. So there's like permissioned and permissionless um coins. So so permission is like we're letting certain people check the balance. That's
Hmm.
permission. That's what they're doing. They're going to initially let a certain amount of people do that, and then later on they're going to have permissionless, so anybody can just host their ledger any anybody can do it, and because at some point it's got to be like cheap enough to do it and efficient enough to do it so everybody can do it and they don't have to worry about the top people just doing that. The
Yeah.
concern with like especially like the people in the crypto sphere that are like way into decentralization, this kind of is like why I said it's pseudo decentralized,
Yeah.
where you have these companies that could like essentially collude with each other, even though they still need like a majority for certain votes, and they need something like 2/3 of it to like determine like if the nodes are all correct. Which like yeah, it's hard to get the 2/3, but if these companies are all like oh like we can play this the right way, they can do it.
Hmm.
It's supposed to be more global. That's why Libra Association and like the Reserve is going to be hosted in Switzerland. It's like globally neutral.
I
And
think they're trying. So, as far as I can tell, it feels like they they're coming out with good intentions, I think, because they're trying to give you this long-term plan. They're like, how do we make this feasible and approachable and easy for users to kind of get used to and be able to adopt
right, yeah,
without it being like a decentralized like anarchy mess of like trying to figure out how are we going to do this. So like let's roll this out slowly. Let's back
right,
it with real world money so that
right,
people feel more confident in it. So like somebody like me or you might feel more confident or would feel confident regardless of if it's backed by real money.
yeah,
But somebody like my mom wouldn't,
mm,
or my dad, or
yeah,
like older people or people who naturally just don't trust systems that they don't understand like that.
yeah,
So this is like it's backed by real money, so I think that people are more likely to adopt it. So they're trying to
Absolutely.
go for like users.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a good thing what they're doing.
Mhm.
It's just, and yeah, it's a cryptocurrency and it's based on the blockchain. It's just um
And they have a plan to decentralize it
right,
eventually.
right. It's
It's
just
hard
a
to trust these big
concern.
companies,
It's just a
but
concern because companies are like regulated by the government. So now
yeah.
you're gonna have there are these calls for hearings before this thing comes out by Facebook. So they're gonna go have a hearing about this thing, about
Mhm.
determining if they can probably actually do it or not, which is crazy because like the one dude that made Bitcoin just, hey, here's the blockchain, let's do this thing, released it, and then now and what they're like even Facebook's doing like open source, gonna have this open source. So it's like that's a good thing, and
Mhm.
like that's usually what they do. But it's like if these certain corporations are like regulated and they're kind of controlled by the government, or like they're in bed like, oh, I will scratch your back, you scratch mine, like watch what you're doing with the crypto and we'll help you out. That's
Mhm.
concerning. And
Yeah.
I guess the governments have to have enough control on enough of these companies to make a dent into authority, but there's always a chance when it's something like the small amount of that small of
Yeah, it's only like 100 people
yeah.
versus like what
N-
three? What was it like 370 million people?
right,
Like if everybody was had their own ledger that there
right,
was being checked and it required like more than 50%,
right,
that would be
right.
a lot more
Mm,
secure.
mm.
Not
And
just a
like
lot more, like leagues more.
and so they're also the plan to make Libra pseudonymous, I think, anonymous, which is basically not fully anonymous, but you can connect your account to like your account has like a pseudonym that's connected to like your,
Mhm.
so like when you're doing transactions, like it doesn't show up as you, but it shows up as something, and then like it's connected, and there's like a middle like thing that kind of connects it to you that is like encrypted.
So like
Cool.
I guess if needed, they could figure out who you are, but
Yeah.
the random stranger can't just like
Right.
go and find that information out.
Right. Which
Um,
could be bad if we start getting into regulation territory with like this, like the government needing to know like the ins or outs of it.
yeah, and then there's also like rules. I know with like banks when you're transferring money or sending money, if it's over a certain amount, I believe it's $10,000, could be more.
Yeah, I think it's $10,000.
But any transactions above that basically have to like get checked for like what the purchase
Hmm.
and the
Yeah,
transaction
it's like
is.
delayed, and then they go through see who's
Mhm.
receiving it, and
So it has to be like a legitimate, like fully foolproof transaction, and that's actually something that that you may see it as like government regulation, over regulation, um, but it does definitely make it more difficult to money launder, to use um, like real money to make large purchases that might be related to criminal activity or like foreign governments or terrorist activity, things like that. It definitely makes those things more difficult. So will cryptocurrencies like Libra or even like how Bitcoin has already been used for a while actually possibly make it easier to perform those things because the government isn't checking them? And then will the government, because of that, force Facebook to allow them to check transactions that are greater than
most
$10,000?
likely they use the whole fear like, oh, the lowest common denominator, this thing is a problem, so let's just regulate it, like over regulate it, and then
Hmm.
push the hand all the way in instead of just like actually just taking care of the problem that they claim to care about. So I definitely see that happening.
Yeah.
Where like I wouldn't say I guarantee, but of the people that are gonna use this, they're probably just buying their coffee and not laundering money. you know, just
Probably,
saying.
but I
It
do
can
think
happen, but it's gonna happen. People are gonna launder the money anyway. I don't
mhm,
know, like it
criminals will do whatever or like use whatever
means, yeah.
tools or means that the world gives them. And if the world gives them an easier way to sell
Hmm.
like
I think they'll use
ridiculous
Bitcoin
stuff,
anyway right now. They wouldn't even bother with Libra. Why would they do that
well,
shit?
Bitcoin is probably still very difficult for criminals for the same reason we mentioned that it being difficult as a currency for normal
Yeah.
users is that it's too volatile.
Yeah.
Like somebody could have just bought like a kidney off the dark web for like a whole Bitcoin, and then afterwards like Libra came out, skyrockets to $10,000 a Bitcoin, and suddenly they just spent 5 times as much on a kidney. I don't think that criminals want to have to worry
Mm.
about every time they make a transaction either
Well,
losing money or gaining money based off the next
right. I
week.
mean, that's only if you keep your money in it. If you literally buy the amount of Bitcoin you're gonna give and then take it back out,
I guess yeah,
then
if
you're
you
good
only
to
buy
go.
the Bitcoin that you would need for the transaction, then at the time of the transaction, it would be
Yes.
that value. But
Like,
it's
so what if it goes up? It's like, oh, I bought this. If you were like to buy like a phone or whatever, and then like the dollar changes in value, it's like, okay, you still spent that amount of money at that point in time that was worth to you. If you were to buy it now, it's a different dollar amount, but it's still worth that same value of your labor or whatever.
mhm. But I definitely think like Bitcoin being as volatile probably is annoying to the criminals as much as it is annoying to
Yeah.
anybody else who's trying to use it as a currency. Not that that's a bad thing. It is a bad thing for the normal users, but it's a good thing to try to dissuade criminals from using these new
Mm.
technologies. Because I think that one thing that I could definitely see the government doing is they love to scapegoat.
Mm.
And if they can say like, "Oh, these cryptocurrencies are being used by criminals," blah 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 blah, we
That's
have to
what.
regulate them.
Yeah. The
Um,
amount of Bitcoin, like the amount of transactions using criminal activity has like decreased and significantly because of the wide like extreme adaptation of buying it basically to hold it. Like it doesn't like it's like kind of like, oh, it was happening when we had like the Silk Road and all that or whatever,
mhm.
and maybe that was happening. But now it just that doesn't happen. People are just trading it or like buying like gift cards with it because that's all they can do or pay
Wouldn't
their taxes.
blockchaining the internet also make the dark web more difficult, or would they just make like a dark web blockchain?
So it would make it um so that it can't be regulated or kicked off really, but it would be like shown. So in a sense
Hmm.
where like you can't host a certain site because of whatever is wrong with it in whatever laws, but now you can do that and everybody's just gonna be like, yeah, or every like majority of people say now you can't do that. Like,
Well, can't you host a site right now just by like setting up a computer in your room and then like assigning it domain and IP and information, and then somebody can just go in a web browser and type in that specific like address for your website and get to it, even if it's like not actually on the
no,
web?
no, you need to like pay, get it. Like we usually pay.
Because
You
like
can't.
I mean
If
I'm
you're
sure
in the
that
same, if you're like on the Wi-Fi that I'm on, yeah, you can connect to it because you're going through connection of like the router. But you can't do that through like the internet. You can't
mhm.
like if I'm at my house, you can't just connect to whatever I set it up as.
Well, I just mean like because
It
I'm
needs to be
pretty sure that's
hosted.
how a lot of these dark web sites exist is that somebody's hosting them and controlling them, like from their own houses or like
Mm.
businesses or
Mm.
locations. I believe that's how it works.
Okay.
And that's why you have to like, you can't just like type in blah, 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 blah.com or anything like that. You have to like type in like a number address sometimes in order to get to certain sites because it's like you're trying to connect. So it's like they're broadcasting it from their computer onto the internet through like a maybe like a VPN or something where it's like you're not going to be able to track where
Yeah.
it's being hosted, the website,
Right.
but you can still access the website.
I mean, if you do that now, maybe you can do that if it was if the internet was blockchain.
I feel like it'd be harder if the internet was blockchain though, maybe because I think right now it'd be like FICA or whatever that
No.
the group that
Credit score.
centralizes the internet domain information. They might have like the website be like part of their information, their database, but not know whether or not it's like something that needs to be like worried about. I don't know exactly how it works on that level.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Um, but it's kind of crazy, honestly, like where this is all going. And I think the idea of decentralization and the use of blockchain is definitely going to continue to
I think I think it's gonna speed up,
Yeah.
especially with the Libra, and even if it's not like fully decentralized, it's gonna get the mainstream like adaptation.
Hmm.
That's gonna get people more on board with decentralization and other cryptos, and I think that's a really good thing. Even if like you're Bitcoin purist, that Libra's not good, but it's
Hmm.
good for everybody else.
Yeah, I think the main reason why blockchain technology being used for information is going to become more and more and more and more common is just because it's better.
Yeah,
And like we as humans, if we see a solution to a problem that is better than the one that we're currently using, we will naturally, slowly kind of adopt it, even if there are forces trying to stop us, because it's objectively more efficient. You know, like the security of a blockchain is a million times stronger than the government, you know, monitoring it. It's like a police report. Like imagine a
yeah,
blockchain of police reports. Now
yeah.
the police can't just willy nilly,
Right.
you know,
Like,
um, adjust information and then
hmm
have to get like uh what's there's like the government group that investigates the
uh,
police.
not the ACLU. Something.
I forget what
Can we
they're
use blockchain to help fight fake news?
probably.
Like accounts of like a thing happening or like reports. Like everybody like is like recording that this thing happened, and like everybody's like, oh yeah, this happened. Versus like the one dude is like, no, 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 it happened like this, and then people then that picks up really quickly. But that's not what's gonna happen. It's whoever was
I think it'd be definitely
actually.
complicated because like,
It's more complicated than any of this other. It's not like a transaction's happening.
and
It's
it's
like a
also
news.
it's not objective. So like if I said that I gave you $1
Right.
or I don't know, like a piece of paper, so that's a transaction. It's just like Guy gave Rob a
Mhm.
dollar
Right.
and Rob gave Guy a piece of paper,
Mm.
and then that's it. But like if it's news, it's like, well, who was there? Can we just trust witnesses? Like different media sources give different renditions of it, even if they're not lying about the information.
Right.
The way that they present it is the part that's going to decide how people respond or think about it rather than the information itself.
Yeah.
So it would definitely be a lot more complicated. I think the more complex the information gets, the more difficult it would be. Um, which is why I think it's just sticking to like deeds and
Yeah.
transactions and
Birth
birth
certificates.
certificates,
Yeah.
insurance like information, like you know how whenever you take out a loan,
Yeah.
your credit score is based off of your transactions,
Yeah.
your bank accounts, your income, what you're making, you know, the taxes that you're paying, any debt you've incurred, like all
Yeah.
of that information related to you, and like you know any assets you own, companies you own, like that stuff being on a blockchain is way better
Oh
than
yeah.
it being just in the government.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then even like people in other countries can access those blockchains
hmm
and be like, I own this land.
Yeah.
And now it's still
Mm.
like it's now a record, even if like the government in like a third world country may not give you a deed and hold that, but this blockchain might.
Yeah.
So then you at least have some proof of ownership of something, or like
Yeah.
something along those lines. Like it could actually expand outside of even like developed countries.
Absolutely. I think it's also part of Libra's statement is that they want to get access to the funds and crypto like funds basically in places where people don't have it and or it's hard to get where like they want to start businesses in like more underdeveloped countries. So now they have a way to accept currency or buy, get more Libra. So then like you can be exchanged locally, so
Yeah.
that like you can start up a business in a place where you probably wouldn't otherwise. Couldn't get the funding to start it.
Yeah, because now it's like if you couldn't buy something in like a country with I guess like US dollars, like you're making like money off of YouTube might be more difficult. Actually no, this is I guess it's not really the right way of looking at it. No, how do you because you can still make money off the internet anywhere you live.
Yeah,
So how would Libra exactly
it's not off the internet. It's like the way they were saying it, it had to do with access to like like funds where like if you can't get funding for like a business,
Or I
like
guess because it's not specific to a country. It's
yeah.
just a value that's based off of. I guess right now it's mostly gonna be based off the
Mhm.
U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
I
Like
guess
or
like if
people
you
that
wanted to
can't have
start
bank
up,
accounts, right? Like
yeah.
in a sense.
So like if you can't have a bank account or like you're in a country that just doesn't have the infrastructure for it,
Right.
like you can guess like start to accrue a credit
Yeah.
to then be able to
Exactly.
take out a loan from a bank
Mhm.
to then be able to start a business or to be able to like get investors.
Right.
Maybe you can get like investors through
Yeah.
Libra.
'Cause all you need is internet access and a smartphone,
Hmm.
because then you'll be in the system of like transactions and all that. Yeah.
I think it just brings like one more thing to people in third world countries to be able to use to try to almost like bring those third world countries up to like the level, like
Yeah.
eventually
Yeah.
the level that all the other countries are at
Yeah.
currently, like the U.S. and um, China and the EU. Like it's hard for a country like in Africa that doesn't have a stable government that's full of, they've got a government that's full of corruption, or they have like a single uh
Warlord.
not a warlord but like a that's what I was thinking, but
Uh,
um like an export.
yeah.
So like diamonds or like gold, like a lot of single export or like primarily single export countries tend to be incredibly corrupt because there's somebody who controls it all. Um, so I think it gives, I think, a little more options to those countries and the
Yeah.
people who live in them, which is really cool. And I think honestly, all of these technologies are like slowly turning the whole world into just like one big group of people on the internet, and
Yeah.
it's kind of cool.
Yeah. It's the interconnection. Yes, and like globalization of
Mhm.
nation.
Only like 40% of people are on the internet though, apparently, which is
That's crazy.
still not as much as you'd think.
Yeah.
Um, but I think at some point it's just going to become like necessary and difficult
Right.
to avoid.
And I think it'd be easier to get like more people on board with like blockchain and decent.
Mhm. Um, but I think that pretty much wraps it up. What do you guys think about Libra? Are you guys interested in I guess you can call it investing if you like purchasing Libra coins? Like, would you guys be willing to? Do you trust Facebook, especially after it's been like selling your information for years?
You guys are gonna hold now your transaction information and all your financial information
Hmm.
that all the other banks are holding. If you weren't on board with like cryptos before, are you getting on board now because it's more stable? And
Hmm.
if
Will
you,
it even be
yeah,
stable?
yeah, exactly.
Like, we don't even know how this is going to go down. This could end up being like a royal disaster, which is going to set blockchain back probably quite a few decades.
Yeah.
But yeah, let us know what you guys think. We love hearing what your thoughts are and hearing your feedback.
As always, thank you for listening and following.
Check us out every Thursday on YouTube, Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, anywhere podcasts are available.
You can find us on Instagram at Unstoppable Force Podcast and Twitter at UForcePod for news and updates.
We'll see you guys next week. And
And
until
until then,
then, stay
stay
unstoppable.
unstoppable.